Hi, welcome to the Aftermath Tales. Ready for a new story? Very well, let's begin.
The smell of smoke still clings to the rebuilt section of our barn as I write this. 3 years after I thought we might lose everything. 3 years since I found a drunk stranger passed out on my grandmother's antique couch while my 8-year-old niece whispered that she was hungry. 3 years since 70% of the barn my great-grandfather built with his own hands burned to the ground because my sister-in-law thought throwing a party with stolen money was more important than her children's safety. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story didn't begin with smoke and chaos. It began with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in July, when the Oklahoma heat was already making the air shimmer like water over our wheat fields. My name is Edna Carson, and at 30 years old, I thought I had my life figured out. I owned 240 acres of the richest farmland in Creek County, land that had been in my family for 3 generations, passed down from my great-grandfather to my grandfather to my parents, and finally to me when they died within 13 months of each other. Daddy's heart gave out one winter morning while he was checking the cattle, and Mama followed him the next spring. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but everyone in town knew better. She died of a broken heart, plain and simple. Frank and I had been married for 8 years by then, and if you'd asked me that Tuesday morning what our biggest problem was, I would have said it was deciding whether to plant soybeans or corn in the south field. Frank's 35, with the kind of steady strength that comes from working land you love, and the gentle heart that made me fall for him when I was barely 22. We'd been trying for children for years, going through all the tests and treatments and monthly disappointments that come with that particular heartbreak. But we'd made peace with it being just the 2 of us. We had our farm, we had each other, and we had a quiet life that felt like everything we needed. The phone rang while I was mixing biscuit batter for breakfast, flour dusting my hands, and Frank already out checking the irrigation lines. "Edna, it's Mandy." Frank's younger sister sounded different, strained, maybe even scared. Mandy Carson was 28 years old and had been running from responsibility her entire life. She had 2 daughters, Emma and Nancy, 8 and 5 respectively, and they were the sweetest children you ever saw despite their mother's best efforts to mess them up. "Hi, Mandy. How are the girls?" "They're fine. Listen, I need to ask you something, and it's kind of a big deal," she replied. I set down my mixing spoon, already knowing I wasn't going to like whatever came next. "What's going on?" "I got fired last week. From the gas station. And my landlord's being a real bastard about the rent. He's giving me until Friday to pay up or get out." Mandy had been working part-time at a Quick Trip in Tulsa, barely making enough to cover rent on the tiny apartment she shared with Emma and Nancy. She'd moved there 6 months earlier after what she called a fresh start, but what everyone else recognized as running away from yet another mess she'd created for herself. What happened at work? Nothing happened. I missed a few days. And maybe I didn't call in like I was supposed to. But they were totally unreasonable about it. I had things going on, you know? I knew, all right. I knew that things going on meant whatever man had caught her attention that week, whatever party she couldn't miss, whatever drama she'd created or gotten herself tangled up in. Mandy had been beautiful once, still was, I suppose, with dark hair and Frank's same brown eyes. But at 28, she looked older than her years, worn down by late nights and bad choices and the kind of living that uses up everything good in a person. "Have you talked to Simon and Wendy?" I asked, referring to Frank's parents. "Already tried. They said no." Her voice turned bitter. "Apparently their apartment in Texas is too small and they don't have room for me and the girls, which is just their way of saying they don't want to deal with us." That wasn't fair, and I suspected Mandy knew it. Simon and Wendy Carson were good people who'd raised their children with love and discipline. They'd also been cleaning up after Mandy's messes throughout her adult life, and when they retired to their 1-bedroom apartment in Dallas, they'd made it clear they were done enabling their daughter's irresponsible behavior. They loved Emma and Nancy fiercely, but they also knew their limits. "So what are you asking, Mandy?" The silence stretched long enough that I could hear Emma's voice in the background asking about breakfast. "I need somewhere to stay." Just temporarily, until I can get back on my feet, find another job, save up for a deposit on a new place. It wouldn't be for long. I closed my eyes, already seeing Frank's face when I told him. He couldn't say no to his sister, especially not when it meant saying no to Emma and Nancy. Those girls had been shuffled around their entire lives, following their mother from one temporary situation to another, never staying anywhere long enough to feel truly settled. How long is temporary? A month, maybe 2 at the most. I swear, Edna, I just need a chance to get my life together, she said. I'd heard those words before, in different variations. Mandy was always on the verge of getting her life together, always one job or one man or one fresh start away from becoming the person she claimed she wanted to be. But there were 2 little girls involved, and they didn't deserve to suffer because their mother couldn't keep her promises. I'll have to talk to Frank. Of course. But Edna, I'm really desperate here. I don't have anywhere else to go. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, staring out at the wheat field where my grandfather had taught me to drive a tractor when I was barely tall enough to reach the pedals. This farm represented everything stable and permanent in my life. It was the place where 3 generations of my family had worked and loved and built something lasting. The idea of bringing Mandy's chaos into that sanctuary made my stomach twist with anxiety. But then I thought about Emma, who was old enough to understand that her mother's problems were becoming her problems too. I thought about Nancy, who was still young enough to believe that grown-ups could fix anything if they really wanted to. And I thought about Frank, who carried the weight of family loyalty like other men carried their tools, as something essential to who they were. When Frank came in for breakfast an hour later, I told him about the call. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. "What did you tell her?" he asked finally. "That I'd talk to you." He sat heavily in his chair, rubbing his face with hands that smelled like engine oil and honest work. "She can't keep doing this, Edna. She can't keep moving those girls around like pieces on a checkerboard every time her life falls apart. And if we say yes, it won't be temporary. You know that, right? Mandy doesn't do temporary. She does whatever's easiest until it stops being easy, and then she moves on to the next thing." We sat in silence for a while, both of us knowing what we were going to do, even though neither of us wanted to say it out loud. Finally, Frank reached across the table and took my hand. "Those girls need stability. They need to know that someone in their lives can be counted on." "Are you sure about this?" "No, but I'm sure about those girls deserving better than they've been getting," he replied. I called Mandy back that afternoon and told her she could come. The relief in her voice was so profound it almost made me feel guilty for hesitating. She said she'd drive down from Tulsa that weekend with Emma and Nancy, and she swore up and down that this time would be different. They arrived on a Saturday in late July, pulling up to our house in Mandy's beat-up sedan that looked like it might not make the trip back to Tulsa, let alone anywhere else. Emma got out first, helping Nancy with her backpack, both girls looking around at our farm with the wide-eyed wonder that city kids get when they see that much open space. "Aunt Edna!" Nancy squealed, running toward me with her arms outstretched. At 5, she was all energy and sunshine, the kind of child who hadn't yet learned to guard her heart against disappointment. Emma was more reserved, offering me a careful hug and a shy smile. "Hi, Aunt Edna. Thanks for letting us come here." Frank appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, and Mandy's whole demeanor shifted. She threw her arms around her brother with dramatic enthusiasm. "Frankie, God, I've missed you. You look good. Farm life agrees with you." "Hey, Mandy." Frank's voice was warm but cautious. "How was the drive? Long. I need a drink and a shower in that order." She looked around again as if seeing the farm for the first time. "Where am I staying? Please tell me there's air conditioning." I showed them to the guest room that Frank and I had hastily prepared, moving furniture around to fit a second twin bed for the girls. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and comfortable with windows that looked out over the pasture where my grandfather used to graze cattle. "This is nice," Emma said quietly, setting her small suitcase on one of the beds. "We can see the animals from here." "Those aren't horses, Emma," Mandy said, not unkindly. "They're cows." "We don't have any cows right now," Frank corrected gently. Just chickens and the old farm cats, but maybe someday we'll get some cattle again. Nancy bounced on her bed, testing the springs. Can we pet the kitties? If they let you. They're pretty friendly, but they're not really pets. They work for their living, keeping the mice away from the grain. The girls spent the rest of that Saturday exploring the farm with the kind of enthusiasm that made me remember why Frank and I had always loved having them visit. They chased the cats, collected eggs from the chicken coop, and helped Frank check the irrigation system, chattering constantly about everything they saw. Mandy, meanwhile, spent most of the day in her room, getting settled, which seemed to involve several phone calls and a lot of loud music. When she finally emerged for dinner, she'd changed into an even tighter dress and announced that she was going into town to see what this place has to offer. There's a diner and a gas station, I told her, and a bar called Murphy's that usually has live music on Saturday nights. Her face lit up. Perfect. I could use some live music. What about the girls? Frank asked. What about them? They're fine here with you guys, right? I mean, that's kind of the point of staying with family. She was gone before I could fully process what had just happened. One day into her stay, and Mandy had already dumped her children on us so she could go out and party. Frank and I looked at each other across the dinner table, both of us realizing that our worst fears about this arrangement were probably going to come true. But Emma and Nancy didn't seem surprised or upset by their mother's departure. They helped me clear the dinner dishes without being asked, and when I suggested we watch a movie, they settled onto our couch like they belonged there. Can we make popcorn? Nancy asked. Of course we can. I said, Mama never makes popcorn, Emma said matter-of-factly. She says it makes a mess. The casual way she said it told me everything I needed to know about what their life with Mandy was really like. These children had learned not to ask for small pleasures because small pleasures weren't worth the hassle they'd cause their mother. Mandy came home at 3 a.m, stumbling up the front porch steps in her heels and waking up everyone in the house when she couldn't figure out how to open the front door quietly. When I went downstairs to let her in, she reeked of cigarette smoke and cheap beer. Sorry, she whispered, though she was too drunk to actually whisper effectively. Couldn't find my keys. Had the best time, though. Met this guy, Derek. He's so sweet. Really has his life together. You know? I knew, all right. Mandy was the type to fall for any man after a few drinks, and Derek was probably just another guy she'd picked up at Murphy's. But I just helped her up the stairs and into her room, checked on the girls, who were both somehow still asleep, and went back to bed. That pattern established itself quickly over the next few weeks. Mandy would sleep until noon, emerge from her room around lunchtime looking for coffee and complaining about being bored, spend the afternoon looking for jobs, which seemed to involve a lot of phone calls and very few actual applications, and disappear for the evening to meet Derek or whoever had caught her attention that week. Meanwhile, Emma and Nancy became my shadow assistants. They helped me feed the chickens, weeded the vegetable garden, and learned to drive the riding mower under Frank's careful supervision. Emma was thoughtful about farm work, asking lots of questions but still needing reminders about safety. Nancy was more interested in the social aspects, making friends with the cats, naming all the chickens, and turning every chore into an elaborate game. I loved having them there, but I also started to understand what Frank meant about it not being temporary. The longer they stayed, the more obvious it became that I was doing all the work of parenting while Mandy enjoyed all the freedom of a single woman with no responsibilities. She contributed nothing to household expenses, assuming that Frank and I would provide food, shelter, and utilities for her and her daughters indefinitely. She left messes everywhere. Dirty dishes in the sink, wet towels on the bathroom floor, makeup smeared on the mirror, and seemed genuinely surprised when I asked her to clean up after herself. "I'm not used to this much space," she'd say, as if that explained why she couldn't manage to put her dirty clothes in the hamper instead of leaving them scattered across the floor. The worst part was watching Frank try to balance his loyalty to his sister with his growing frustration at the situation. He loved Emma and Nancy, but he'd married me, not them, and he could see how the constant responsibility of caring for children was affecting our relationship. We barely had time for conversations anymore, let alone the quiet evenings we'd once enjoyed together. I was too tired from managing a household that had doubled in size overnight to help him with the farm work, which meant he was carrying that burden alone. By September, I was beginning to understand why Simon and Wendy had said no to taking Mandy in. It wasn't that they didn't love their granddaughters. It was that they'd learned the hard way that enabling Mandy helped no one, least of all Emma and Nancy. But then October arrived, and with it came the final straw that broke everything open. I'd driven into town that Thursday morning to buy supplies for our farming operation, seeds for the winter planting, fertilizer, and some equipment Frank needed to repair the irrigation system. The total came to just over $2,000, representing months of careful saving and planning. It was money we couldn't afford to lose, money that would determine whether we'd have a successful spring planting. I kept it in Frank's desk drawer in an envelope marked Farm Fund in my careful handwriting, planning to make the purchases over the weekend when Frank could come with me to help load the heavy bags. When I got home that evening, Frank was waiting for me in the kitchen, his face pale with a kind of anger I'd never seen before. "It's gone," he said without preamble. "What's gone?" "The money. All of it. The envelope's empty," he said, voice shaking. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. "That's not possible. I put it right in your desk drawer in the back where—" "I know where you put it. I've already asked Mandy." "What did she say?" Frank's expression grew darker. "She said she borrowed it. Had to pay for something important. She'll pay us back as soon as she gets her next unemployment check." I sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, the weight of what he was telling me settling into my bones like lead. $2,000. Gone. What could she possibly need $2,000 for? That's what I asked. She got defensive, said it was private, that we wouldn't understand, started crying about how hard her life is and how nobody supports her. The familiar pattern of Mandy's manipulation was so predictable it would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Whenever she was caught doing something wrong, she immediately flipped the script to make herself the victim. "Frank, we need that money. The planting season." I know, honey. I'm going to figure something out. Maybe the bank will give us a short-term loan." But even as he said it, we both knew how tight money was for small farming operations. Banks weren't eager to lend to people who lived season to season, depending on weather and crop prices they couldn't control. I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced since my parents died. It was the recognition that someone I'd trusted had betrayed that trust so completely that there was no going back. Frank spent the next morning on the phone with the bank, and by some miracle they agreed to a short-term loan based on our projected harvest. The relief was overwhelming, but it came with the bitter taste of knowing we were in this position because of Mandy's selfishness. "I'm sorry," Frank said as we prepared to leave that Saturday morning, the loan paperwork in my purse and a shopping list of farm supplies on the seat between us. "I'm so sorry she put us in this position." "It's not your fault," I told him, though I could see the guilt eating at him. "She's a grown woman who made her choice." The bank was in the next county over, and then we had to drive to the farm supply store outside the city, followed by the supermarket for groceries. Frank kept apologizing during the long drive, kept saying he should have stood up to his sister sooner, kept promising that things would change. "When we get back, I'm going to lay down the law," he said as we loaded feed bags into the truck. 2 months to find a job and start paying us back. If she can't manage that, she needs to find somewhere else to go. I nodded, watching him stack fertilizer bags with more force than necessary. "What about Emma and Nancy?" "They stay with us, if you want them to, I mean. I know this isn't what we planned." "Frank, I love those girls like they were my own. If there was a way to adopt them, to make it legal and permanent, I'd do it in a heartbeat. They belong with us." The relief on his face told me he'd been hoping I'd say exactly that. We spent nearly 6 hours away from home, first at the bank, then the long drive to the farm supply store, then the supermarket to stock up on food for the coming week. By the time we turned into our driveway late that afternoon, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across our property. The first thing we noticed was the cars. Lots of them, parked haphazardly around our yard, some on the grass, some blocking the path to the barn. The second thing we noticed was the smoke. Gray smoke was rising from the direction of the barn, visible against the darkening sky. But this wasn't just a little smoldering. We could see orange flames dancing through the open barn doors. "Oh my God," I breathed, and Frank was already throwing the truck into park before we'd even come to a complete stop. "Call 911!" Frank shouted as he jumped out. The summer had been brutal, week after week of temperatures over 100 degrees with no rain. Everything was tinder dry, and the fire was spreading fast. I dialed with shaking hands while running toward the barn. 911, we need fire department immediately. Our barn is on fire and it's spreading rapidly. By the time we reached the barn, flames were consuming the hay bales and starting to climb the wooden support beams. Frank grabbed the fire extinguisher from the barn office, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a cup. "It's too big," he said, his voice hollow with despair. "We need the fire department." That's when the party guests finally noticed the emergency. Through the smoke, I could see people spilling out of our house, pointing and shouting. Car engines started roaring to life as they realized they didn't want any part of this disaster. Within minutes, they were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The fire department arrived 12 minutes later, but by then the damage was catastrophic. We stood helplessly as they fought to save what they could, watching 70% of my family's barn, the one my great-grandfather had built with his own hands, go up in flames. "We saved about 30%, the fire chief told us when it was over, but you lost most of your storage area and equipment." Frank was shaking, not from exhaustion, but from rage and devastation. We'd just taken out a loan that morning to buy farming supplies and equipment, most of which was now ash. The financial impact was staggering. "How did it start?" the fire chief asked. "Someone was smoking near the hay," Frank said, pointing to a cigarette butt one of the firefighters had found in the debris. We were at a party we didn't know about. That's when we smelled more smoke, this time coming from our house. The barn was only about 20 feet from our home, and the wind had been carrying smoke and embers directly toward it. "The girls!" I screamed, suddenly remembering Emma and Nancy. We ran toward the house, where smoke was visibly seeping through the upstairs windows. Frank threw open the front door, and we were hit with a wall of acrid air. Derek, Mandy's boyfriend, was still passed out on my grandmother's antique couch, completely oblivious to the sirens, the fire, and the fact that the house was filling with smoke. He was snoring loudly, drooling on the upholstery, apparently too drunk to notice that the world was literally burning around him. "Where are the girls?" Frank demanded of Mandy, who was standing in the living room looking confused and panicked. "Upstairs in their room," she said. "They're fine, We didn't wait for her to finish. Frank and I raced up the stairs where the smoke was much thicker. We found Emma and Nancy huddled together on Emma's bed, both coughing and crying, still in their pajamas from that morning. "Aunt Edna," Nancy sobbed when she saw me. "We couldn't get out. Mama locked the door and told us not to come out no matter what." I scooped up Nancy while Frank grabbed Emma, and we carried them outside where the paramedics immediately gave them oxygen masks. "We've been in there all day," Emma said between coughs, her voice scared but trying to be brave. "Since this morning, we were really hungry." That's when Frank turned to look at his sister with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, cold rage. "You locked them in a room during a fire," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Then his voice exploded with fury. "Is this why you stole our money? To throw this goddamn party?" "It's my birthday!" Mandy screamed back defensively. "I deserve a party!" Frank stared at her in disbelief. "You nearly killed them." "I didn't know there was going to be a fire," Mandy protested. "It's not my fault." But Frank was already walking away from her, toward the police officers who had arrived with the fire department. "Officer," Frank called out, "I need to report child abuse and endangerment." What followed was swift and decisive. The police documented Nancy's faded handprint bruise, took statements from both girls about being locked up without food all day, and listened as Emma carefully described what she'd witnessed. Derek had to be physically carried to the police car, still too drunk to walk. As they put the handcuffs on Mandy, she finally seemed to grasp the severity of what was happening. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry," she sobbed, looking desperately between Frank and me. "But you don't understand how hard this has been for me. I'm trying my best here. I never meant for any of this to happen." Even now, she was making it about her struggles, her intentions, her pain. "I know I made mistakes, but I'm their mother. You can't just take them away from me." She was full-on wailing now, mascara streaming down her face. "Frank, please, don't let them do this to me. I'm your sister." Frank looked at her with an expression of cold finality I'd never seen before. "You are not my sister anymore," he said, his voice flat and final. "I don't have a sister. You nearly killed my wife's family legacy, and you nearly killed those children. You're dead to me." Mandy's sobs turned into hysterical screaming. "No, Frank, you can't mean that. I'm family. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't abandon me like everyone else." But Frank had already turned his back on her as the officers led her away, her cries echoing across our property until the police car door slammed shut. The next morning, my father-in-law called. "Frank, Mandy called us crying from jail. What happened?" Frank told his parents everything, the stolen money, the party, the fire, the abuse. When he finished, there was a long silence. "Put Emma on the phone," Simon said quietly. Emma took the phone with trembling hands. "Hi, Grandpa. Sweetheart, tell me what happened with your mama." Emma's voice was small but clear as she recounted everything, the hunger, the slap, being locked in the smoky room while strangers partied downstairs. "Can I talk to Nancy too?" Nancy took the phone. "Grandpa, we don't want to live with Mama anymore. Can Uncle Frank be our real daddy and Aunt Edna be our real mama? Please?" When Frank got the phone back, his father's voice was shaking with rage. "Son, we're calling our lawyer today. Those babies are staying with you. Mandy made her choice. Now we're making ours." CPS got involved, as we knew they would, but the social worker took one look at our stable home, Frank's family relationship to the girls, and the children's clear preference to stay with us, and granted immediate kinship placement. Mandy was sentenced to 6 months in jail and lost her parental rights. Derek got 90 days and a restraining order. We never saw a penny of that stolen money back. After jail, Mandy drifted away, still blaming everyone else for her problems and never asked to see the girls again. 3 years later, as I write this, the adoption papers are long finalized. Emma and Nancy are thriving. They call us Mom and Dad, and every night when I tuck them into bed, I'm reminded that sometimes the most devastating losses lead to the most precious gains. Emma just made honor roll again, and Nancy has discovered a talent for raising chickens. They're happy, healthy children who know they're loved and wanted. The last straw became the foundation of our real family. Sometimes the best things come from the worst situations, and sometimes saying goodbye to one person means saying hello to the life you were always meant to have.
If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Don't forget to follow for more content just like this. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.